Welcome back. This is Deal with the Devil by KloWhispers, Chapter 6, Heartbeat. Now, talking to teachers wasn't his forte and never had been, so Izuku had been standing there in front of the teacher's lounge for 5 minutes now, playing with his fingers, hesitating. Talking in general wasn't his best skill, communicating with others had never helped him, and often ended up hurting him, But he had to ask his teachers about his weapons. He wanted to know what he could get and what was too much for a first-year hero. Maybe he should have gone directly to the support department where the pro hero power loader was in charge of the costumes. Yeah, he should go there, shouldn't he? But what if it was too early and no one was there? And what if he said no? That he couldn't personally customize his weapons? He should have done it earlier in the year while sending his costume demand. Why hadn't he done it then? Oh, that's right, because he had been stressing over starting UA, avoiding his mother, and trying to survive Chizume's sparring lessons that had become 10 times harder since he had been accepted in the hero school. Problem child. Izuku startled, looking up from his hands. Aizawa-sensei was in front of him, the teacher's lounge door open, and he was being stared at by red glowing eyes. Huh? Hi. He closed his mouth immediately. He was clearly annoying his teacher. Why had he thought it was a good idea? Did you have a question? Aizawa's bored voice cut through his thoughts again, and he grimaced. He was there now, right? Might as well ask. I wanted to know if there's any regulations for weapons, and I kinda know about the knives and blades. I have some preferences, and I'd like to make them like I want to. So, what am I allowed to do? Instead of the reaction Izuku thought he would have, rolled eyes and an annoyed sigh with a dismissed gesture, Aizawa actually hummed, brow furrowed. The teacher crossed his arms on his chest and leaned on the doorframe. You'll have to check with Power Loader for that, but with your quirkless status, some things might change, since your weapons have nothing to do with the quirk. You actually know how to wield blades? It was so weird not being judged for being quirkless and actually having a conversation where he's treated as a human person. Izuku was still getting used to that. Huh? Yeah, I do. I've been training kinda on my own with throwing knives, daggers, and a katana, some other useful stuff. Clever of you. Well, you'll have to ask Power Loader, but I'm sure it'll be fine for you to just ask what you want. It's logical to want to use weapons you know how to use and are comfortable with. Did he just... Izuku blinked. Surprised by the sudden compliment, he really hadn't been expecting that, and from a Racerhead? So cool. But, for now, go back to class or you'll be late. Izuku nodded. Yes, sensei, and thank you. Izuku was about to leave, but then he paused. Just one more question. Aizawa looked at him, an eyebrow raised. If I happen to already own some blades, is it possible that I bring them here for, training and to keep them with my hero costume? He would love to be able to keep them on himself all the time, but he was sure it wasn't allowed and probably illegal, maybe after he got his hero provisional license. Theoretically, yes, you can bring them here. They'll just have to be checked over to see if they're in the regulations. That was nice, and weird that his teacher wasn't demanding to know why he was asking that. Right, okay, thank you, sensei. And without another glance towards the man, Izuku darted off. Finally, he'd be able to have good blades with him. Even better, weapons he was used to. He'd have to bring them tomorrow. For the foundational skill of heroics we'll study today, rescue. It was decided you'll be supervised by me, All Might, and another person. Reactions were varied to that declaration, some disappointed and some rising interest. Izuku, for his part, was rather interested. That is what a hero should do first, save and help people, then capture the bad guys. Aizawa was letting them have the liberty of wearing their costumes or not. Izuku chose to take it with him. As he reached for his case with his support weapons, he looked up at Aizawa, wanting to know if he was allowed to bring his blades. The teacher caught his glance and nodded slightly. Even if they were going to do rescue, it felt right to have his blades with him. The uncomfortable feeling that he had since seeing the intruder yesterday hadn't left either, so he wanted to be prepared. As Chizumi taught him, being over-prepared is never a bad thing. Getting in the bus was a bit of a hassle, as Ida was overcomplicating things. Izuku ended up sitting next to Jiro, who had taken her seat next to him quietly. Izuku didn't really like taking the bus with the class. It wasn't anything personal against his current class, but the memories of old bus travel with his old classmates were hovering, and it made his skin crawl a little. But Jiro's calm presence helped a lot. He was actually zoning out when he heard someone call for him. He turned his head, focusing on the conversation. It was Asui, her tongue out, head tilted a bit, and her finger on her chin. It took him a moment to process her question. Midoriya? We never saw your quirk, so I'm wondering what it is, Garo. Oh. Everyone was looking at him, waiting for his answer. Yeah, he really wasn't fond of bus rides. He actually didn't know what to answer. Tell the truth and risk losing their barely there friendship? He couldn't survive another 3 years of bullying. He couldn't. But how could he lie about that? It was written in his record, and all he had was some basic sword skills. The silence stretched, only disturbed by the noise made by the bus's motor. He wasn't ready to say that. He didn't want middle school to repeat itself. We're arriving soon. Prepare to get off the bus. Aizawa's voice made them all startled, their teacher standing next to them, quirk activated, red eyes and floating hair. Izuku sighed. He was so thankful for the timing right now. Meeting number 13 made Izuku smile. Knowing pretty much everything about the hero and their quirk, Black Hole, and seeing Uraraka fangirling made him chuckle. She reminded him of himself before he was diagnosed as quirkless. As the teachers were explaining what they were going to do, describing the different areas of the USJ, places that imitate any kind of disaster, floods, onsendes, earthquakes, etc., Izuku noticed something flickering in the corner of his eyes. He froze. Sensei? His voice was quiet, but Jiro stilled next to him, and Aizawa glanced at him. Izuku pointed to the plaza all the way to the center of the huge training area. A sort of mist, dark purple, growing slowly, and someone walked out of it. Despite the alarming amount of severed hands on the person, Izuku recognized him, the guy that broke into UA the other day. His hands went on the tsuka of his katana, and he was so glad he had the entirety of his gear with him. The dark mist expanded, and more people, villains, got out of it. Huddle together and don't move, Aizawa told them, his capture weapon already moving. The students made noises of surprise, not really understanding what was going on. Jiro cursed next to him, having caught on. Izuku clenched his teeth but listened to Aizawa, backing off towards the exit and the rest of the class. Number 13, protect the students. What? What's going on? It was Kirishima who voiced the question. Don't move. Those are real villains. And with that, Aizawa darted towards the plaza, where all the villains were. Izuku tightened his grip, restraining himself to go after him, because Aizawa was good, yes, but there were too many of them. He didn't have enough skill for that. Few heroes did. Apparently, he's been muttering, because Jiro interrupted his stream of words. You think we should go help him? Izuku grimaced, eyes darting around, counting villains. Too many, counting exist. There was only one behind them. Aizawa told us to stay here. He glanced at Jiro, who was looking at him seriously. Your heartbeat is the steadiest here. I know you can fight, and you're thinking you can handle what's going on. You should go help him. That made him pause, because, yes, he was sort of calm, and he hadn't really thought about Jiro's inability to hear heartbeats. Then, the mist, a warp quirk, Izuku's mind supplied, started talking. Erase her head in number 13. According to the teacher's curriculum we got the other day, All Might is also supposed to be here. Izuku cursed. He knew it. Where is he? We went through all this trouble. Don't tell me All Might, the #1 hero, isn't here? That hasn't been the Warper talking, but Hand Guy. Izuku frowned. They wanted All Might. Why? We, the League of Villains, want to destroy the symbol of peace. All Might needs to die. I wonder if he's gonna show up if we kill the kids. Izuku didn't need another word of conviction from Jiro. He put on his mask that was hanging around his neck, hiding the down half of his face, and broke into a sprint, following Aizawa's path, focused on the villains. He noticed purple mist behind him, just missing him. He risked a glance back. He's warping the students. Shit, he's sending them on the incident sites. He couldn't think about that now. He had a teacher to help. Ahead of him, Aizawa was already fighting, hair and capture weapon floating. He was throwing punches left and right, and there were so many villains surrounding him already. Izuku clenched his teeth and took his katana out. Time to make good use of his mentor's training. He was about to reach the plaza when he got noticed. A few villains turning his way, a woman with serpents as hair. He had to avoid the snakes, maybe avoid the eyes if her quirk was related to Medusa. Dodge her serpents, hit her in the guts. Don't waste time. Hit her with the flat of the blade on her arm, then knock her out with a giant right hook. Izuku took a breath. Next villain. Come on, he could do it. Even if his blade was out, he wasn't really using it yet. But soon enough, he understood. They wanted to kill him. He couldn't hesitate. He had to draw blood. He was debating if yes or no he should get closer to Aizawa, not knowing if he was going to bother the man more if he did. His hesitation cost him a hit to the thigh, ripping the cloth there. He whirled around, slashing with his blade, and he felt the katana cut through the villain's chest, blood immediately spilling out. The villain fell to the ground. Izuku swallowed. He knew the wound wasn't lethal, but still. So, he straightened and went back to work. Aizawa had noticed him and scolded, but didn't tell him to leave. So, side by side, blades and capture weapon took out villains one by one. Then, you can't hesitate. Start again. Izuku, almost scolded, but stood up again, not bothering to dust off his pants from dirt. He'd been thrown down by Stain for the nth time today. Izuku had a sword, which was a little too long but very light, and Stain had no weapon. He knew it didn't mean he was armless, of course. The body could also be a deadly weapon if used and trained well, but attacking someone with no obvious weapons or protections with a sword was new to Izuku. He was used to not being able to fight or protect himself, and now the roles were reversed. He was unsure about the situation, and yes, Stain was a really good fighter, and yes, Izuku had no chance of winning against him, even with any kind of weapon. He'd been training with the man for a little over a year now, and he was still shit at fighting. But still, he didn't want to hurt people, even if said people were villains. That's not why he wanted to become a hero, and Izuku also knew that he would have no choice during taking down villains. They wouldn't hesitate to hurt him, so why should he? Kid. Izuku sighed, letting go of his fighting stance, focusing his glare on Stain. You can't hesitate, because villains won't, and it will get you killed. No. I don't think you do. No. Do not hesitate. If you have to draw blood, then so be it. You won't be able to save a lot of people if you can't even protect yourself, kid. Izuku clenched his jaw. He knew Stain was right. He knew it. He took a sharp breath, tightened his grip around the handle of his sword, and put himself back into his fighting stance. He'll try not to hesitate. Stain was right. One day, he wouldn't have a choice. Now. In the landslide zone, Todoroki was freezing the floor, encasing the villains in ice, and Hagakure was helping the best she could, while trying not to freeze to death. In the ruined zone, Bakugo was firing explosion after explosion, Kirishima by his side. In the mountain zone, Momo, Kaminari, and Jiro were fighting off villains. Kaminari had already fried his brain, and Momo was creating more and more weapons and devices. A worried Jiro kept her earjacks in the ground, sending sound waves towards the remaining villains, all the while praying that Midoriya and Aizawa-sensei were holding on. In the conflagration zone, Ojiro and Aoyama were running back towards the entrance, one swaying his tail and the other pushing off villains with his laser. In the Downpour Storm Zone, Tokoyami and Koda were fighting villains, Dark Shadow having a blast scaring the villains. In the Flood Zone, Asui was escaping a boat surrounded by villains thanks to her frog abilities, while annoyingly taking care of Mineta. She was wondering whether or not it was heroic to think about leaving him on the boat. In the entrance, number 13 was doing their best to protect the students. Ida, Uraraka, Shoji, Sato, Sero, and Ashido bravely helping them, but the pro hero knew they wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Opening the door and sending Ida for backup were their main priorities, as was protecting the students. Izuku was starting to tire. His thighs, his mouth, and his right arm were bleeding. Most of his throwing knives were used, his katana bloody, and he was breathing deeply. Trying to continue the fight, he wasn't used to fighting so many at the same time, and trying to understand their quirks while fighting them and avoiding them was hard. And he wasn't used to the blades he was using. He was often missing his targets because the stupid weight in his throwing knives weren't balanced like he's used to, which was fucking annoying. As he glanced around, having just knocked out a villain with a sort of hedgehog quirk, he saw Aizawa fight against Hangai. His eyes widened. Hangai was counting, getting closer to his teacher, and Aizawa was slowing down, getting tired as well. Aizawa's hair fell down. Hangai smiled. "Sensei! His quirk is disintegration! Back off!" Hangai froze for a second, permitting Aizawa to take a step back. Then, his hair went up again. He kicked the villain hard in the guts, making him groan, before he could use his capture weapon on him. Purple mist took Hangai away, leaving a panting Aizawa, but thankfully more or less uninjured. Izuku jogged to his teacher, noticing most of the villain that were on the plaza laid on the ground, or were gone. It was just him, Aizawa, Hangai, Miskai, and the fountain. And the huge monster that was by their side, what the fuck was that? "You're an annoying one, aren't you? Maybe you're different from the other NPCs," Hangai said, scratching his neck with his nails, but Izuku's eyes were still on the weird creature, trying to understand what it was. Animals with quirks were rare, and this didn't look like a normal animal. A sort of shape-shifting quirk, maybe? But this thing didn't make any sense. This is a Nomu, especially made to kill All Might. Izuku and Aizawa froze. It was made to kill All Might. He suddenly remembered that day on the roof when All Might told him he couldn't be a hero. Something had been off with the hero, but Izuku hadn't really focused on it. He had been not okay that day and dissociating pretty much all along. "Let's see if you really are better than those NPCs. Nomu, attack Eraserhead. I'll take care of the child." Shit, not the time to remember random stuff. Before Izuku could do anything, Aizawa pushed him away with his capture weapon. Izuku shouted by surprise, seeing the Nomu rushing towards his teacher with a scream. Izuku landed hard a few meters away, taking a few seconds to stand up again. He immediately turned towards his teacher, his hurt stopping in his chest. The hero was currently in the grip of the Nomu, eyes lit red, but it didn't seem to work. It's not a quirk then, possibly a mutation, but those scars are medical scars. And he said it was made. Not the time to focus on that either. The Nomu was holding Aizawa by the arms, and by the screams the teacher let out, he probably got his arm broken. Izuku was running back at him, blade in hand, but "Don't come closer!" Aizawa's warning stopped him. He couldn't just wait there. He glanced back at the hand villain, who seemed to enjoy watching the scene. A spark of anger lit inside of Izuku, joining the ache, fear, and tiredness that was already there. Izuku straightened as his opponent turned his red eyes towards him. Izuku clenched his hand. He had his katana and one hunting knife left. That was all. Not much of his skin was showing. The many-layered armor was still going strong, with a few exceptions. He swallowed. "What's your name?" The villain tilted his head at his question, but answered, surprisingly. Izuku was trying to buy some time to at least catch his breath. Shigaraki Tomura, what's yours? Yeah, he wasn't going to answer that. At least not the truth. Try to guess. Shigaraki frowned and then snarled. That's not fair. Izuku almost rolled his eyes and under his breath said, yeah, no shit. At that, the villain charged him, right hand outstretched before him. Izuku put himself in a fighting stance, 2 hands around the tsuka of his katana. This time, he had to be fast, and he couldn't afford to be touched. It was going to be like the battle trials, when he had to keep avoiding Bakugo's explosions. Except, the risk wasn't simple burns, it was disintegration. Izuku took a step back and swung his blade. After that, all was kind of a blur. He was trying his best to avoid Shigaraki's hands, and also tried his best at hitting the other. Hand coming towards his right side, twist his waist to avoid him. Use the left hand to take his last knife and try cutting Shigaraki. Anywhere. Back off. Try again. Avoid. Then hit. Back off. Almost trip. Make the villain trip. Hit him across the face with his katana. At that, Shigaraki cried out and took a few steps back. Hands, his real ones, covering his face. Izuku hissed in and out a breath, which was coming out jagged out of his mask. Transpiration dripping in his eyes, or maybe it was blood? So Izuku breathed, eyes driven on the villain, seeing the huge black blur the Nomu was on the corner of his eyes. His whole body ached, although it wasn't worse than usual, but maybe it was the adrenaline helping. What did you do? Shigaraki was looking down at his hands, which were covered in blood, and on the left of his face was a red slash, his whole cheek cut open, blood leaking freely. Izuku expected to feel bad, or disgusted by his own action, but he wasn't. He felt satisfied. Shigaraki deserved it. He was targeting kids for fuck's sake. He clenched his teeth and put himself back into his fighting stance. He was ready for round 2. But as he was going to advance, he stilled at someone's call. Shigaraki Tomura. It was the villain with the warp quirk that had spoken, who had just been a misty presence since then, was fully back, yellow eyes and metal collar. Shigaraki turned around, clearly annoyed. Izuku glanced at Aizawa. He was still immobilized by the Nomu, but the creature seemed to have stopped moving, just holding him captive, awaiting further orders. Thank God. You should go back with the students now. Aizawa's voice was so quiet that Izuku almost didn't hear his request, but he pressed his lips together and shook his head. He wasn't going to leave. He wouldn't leave Aizawa to fight alone against this Nomu thing. Kurogiri, is number 13 dead? Both Izuku and Aizawa focused back on the 2 villains as Shigaraki's question. Please, no. I have incapacitated them. However, I'm afraid a student escaped through the gates. That must have been Ida. Please let it be Ida, for he was the fastest of them all. Shigaraki didn't seem to take the news well, throwing a sort of tantrum. How old is he? Talking with video game slang as well. Huh. If you can't do your job properly, then all of this is useless. All Might isn't here. More pro heroes will arrive. This is pissing me off. Izuku thought of something. It was taking a risk, but it couldn't get worse than this, right? He took a breath, then said, Actually, I saw you enter UA yesterday. Shigaraki turned slowly towards him, scratching his neck furiously. What? They knew something was up, so they changed the program last minute. All Might is on the other side of the country right now, and there's pro heroes in the area, ready to intervene if something goes wrong. If Ida went out about now, in a few minutes a bunch of heroes would arrive. The 2 villains were listening to him intently, and Izuku prayed for his voice to stay calm, to not stutter or hesitate. Believe me, please. While it is possible for the young student here is lying, it would be best for us to retreat. It would be too much of a risk to continue this mission. Kurogiri seemed the most sensible of the pair, almost behaving like a parent towards the hand villain. Why should I believe you? It's obvious you don't trust me, but I have no reasons to lie. I hate All Might as much as any other guy. It was risky to admit this. He didn't hate All Might, but he strongly disliked him. Didn't mean he wanted him to die, though. He was still the symbol of peace. Shigaraki tilted his head, stopped scratching his neck, which was red from the blood that was spilling out of his cheek wound. You hate him? But you're a hero. Well, nobody's perfect. He said to my face that I couldn't be a hero, so not a fan. Crash. A loud noise resonated through the entire USJ, stopping everyone in their movements. What did I say? I don't lie. The heroes are here. It was a total lie. Izuku had no idea where that sound came from or what it was. Tomura, we have to go. Shigaraki cursed, then waved his hand, as if it was the command Kurogiri was waiting for. Slowly, purple mist expanded, taking the closest villains with it. The Nomu let go of Aizawa and then went back to Shigaraki, both of them finally being engulfed by the mist. But Shigaraki had the time to say a last comment, voice full of anger. We'll meet again. You're pissing me off. I'll cut your face next time. And then they disappeared, leaving nothing behind, only bloodstains. Everything stayed still for a while, the silence deafening. Then there was another loud crash and, "Have no fear, for I am here!" Izuku almost laughed, if not for being concentrated on running back to his teacher, who was laying on the ground. But he was moving and breathing. To Izuku's relief, he let go of his katana, the blade was bloody, and undid his mask, letting it rest back around his neck. He helped his teacher sit up, careful around his arm that was leaking blood, but not an alarming amount, and no bones were visible. Izuku sat down as well, exhaustion finally slipping in. His entire body ached, almost worse than the aftermath of Chizume's lessons. "You alright, Sensei?" His teacher was staring at him with almost disbelief, then he shook his head. "You really are a problem child." Izuku smiled sheepishly, wiped the blood from his blade on his pants. His heart was slowing down. The villains were gone. He took a deep breath. "You acted recklessly." Izuku lifted his head, green eyes meeting black dry ones. "But you probably saved a lot of people today, so thank you." It was Izuku's turn to stare in disbelief at Aizawa. Then he smiled, bright and toothy. Aizawa scolded, but his eyes were soft, and Izuku almost let out a giggle. Well, he did let out a giggle, but no one had to know about it. Only him and Aizawa. "Also, you should tie your hair since it's a giveaway if you use your quirk or not." "Stop talking, problem child." The first loud crash had actually been Jiro and Kaminari, who had tried to access the command room to try and communicate to the outside, but the whole thing had exploded because of a villain trying to stop them from entering, and an overload of electricity caused accidentally by Kaminari. The second loud crash had obviously been All Might arriving to a villain's empty place. Izuku and Aizawa walked back at the entrance. Almost all the students were there. The gates were open, and pro heroes were actually arriving, with the police and ambulances. The first and only person sent to the hospital urgently had been number 13, but the medics said they would be fine. Jiro went immediately to Izuku, and he was so relieved to see her with only a few scratches. The pro hero recovery girl had arrived as well, distributing kisses left and right. Some students needed it more than others. Izuku received one as well, feeling more exhaustion creeping in. But he didn't pass out. He had been pleasantly surprised to see that none of them had been disintegrated. Aizawa had been treated first, enjoying his newly healed arm and talking to a policeman, to a certain Detective Sakauchi. In the end, there hadn't been any irreversible damages, which was good, but also weird. Those were professional villains, but their plan had seemed so simple, almost too much. There had been so many things that could have gone wrong, and it did. The main thing being All Might's absence. Were they really going to kill all the students? Then what? Their only advantage had been this Nomu thing, which, yes, this was worrying. Shigaraki had been the mastermind there, but his plan hadn't been solid at all. There was also the fact that he had sacrificed at least 50 villains for this. But Izuku was glad about all that. They had been lucky, he knew this. Next time, because he knew there was going to be a next time, they wouldn't be so lucky, but he would be ready. After some questions, they let the students go rather quickly. Aizawa had seemed hesitant to do so, but Principal Nezu and some of the authorities had been sure about their safety. A lot of the class had been picked up by their parents. Izuku waited with Jiro, talking quietly with her. She went home with a promise from him to text later. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he left UA. He didn't know if he wanted to go home. He also didn't know what was worse, his mother being absent or present. He didn't want to explain to her what happened. She might not even want to hear about it. He wanted to see Chizme. He'll go to the barn and wait there for him. It also wouldn't be the first time he slept the night there. As he walked, he felt the aches of his muscles, the tiredness behind his eyes, how heavier his school bag felt, but he still was super aware of what was going on around him, as if the adrenaline hadn't completely faded away. He really wanted to sleep, but he stayed aware of his surroundings, Shigaraki's last threat still fresh in his memory. He blinked, already in front of his apartment door, took the key from his pocket and went in. The inside was still and silent, of course, not out of the ordinary, but something made him pause. He closed the door behind him, glancing around while he took off his red shoes. He didn't light the apartment, the setting sun outside shining through the windows, making everything seem gold. He walked to the kitchen and stopped short when he saw a piece of paper on the table, next to a thick envelope. Slowly, he approached it, cautious, as if it was going to jump on him. It was just a piece of paper, so why was his heartbeat increasing so fast? With a slightly trembling hand, he took the letter, feeling his stomach drop as he recognized the handwriting. It was his mother's. He blinked a few times, then started reading the few kanjis written on the paper. I can't watch you die, because you know that's what is going to happen if you go down that path. I don't understand why you keep thinking you can do it. It's not good for you. All I wanted was for you to do something not as reckless as trying to be a hero. You need to grow up and realize that life isn't like that. You need to stop following this child's dream you have. I can't watch you destroy yourself like this. I don't recognize you anymore. I don't think you understand how hard it is for me. There's money in the envelope, and I think your scholarship helps you enough so you can rent a studio. Izuku stared at the paper for a second more, then reread it, slowly. He put the letter back down on the table. It was straight to the point. There were no emotions, no goodbyes, nothing, not even a signature. Izuku swallowed. His eyes were starting to burn, but no, he wouldn't cry. Not over that. Not over her. He wouldn't. A tear fell down his cheek, slowly, rolling to his chin, staying there for a while, then falling on the kitchen floor. He wasn't even surprised. He was kind of waiting for that, actually. He had thought about leaving the house before, but he was still too young to get a job and to live alone. And despite everything, he didn't want to leave his mom alone. His dad had already left, probably because of him, so he hadn't wanted to. But here he was. He had thought that maybe, after proving her that he could be a hero, she would start accepting him. She would start loving him again. He swallowed, his brows furrowed. I don't think you understand how hard it is for me. How hard for her? What about him? What about years of bullying, neglect, and discrimination? What about the suicide baiting? What about being treated like glass, or worse, like he wasn't even human and just trash? What about being ignored, laughed at, pitied at? What about that, huh? He clenched his jaw. No, he refused to feel angry. Not at her. It wasn't her fault. Who would want a quirkless child? She had done a lot for him already. He wiped his tears away, took the envelope, the letter, and went to his room. Half an hour later, he got out, 2 heavy bags and his school bag with him. He closed the door of the apartment with his keys, then hid them under the rug that was at the entrance. He walked out of the building complex. Fast, steady steps, steady breath. His eyes were dry. When Chizme got back to the barn, Izuku had already been there for a couple hours, his stuff on the sofa, and him laying on the floor staring at the ceiling. He felt weirdly empty. He had expected to cry or feel sad or angry, but he was feeling absolutely nothing. The only person that should have loved him didn't, so he stayed there staring at the wooden ceiling. A shadow over his face made Izuku blink. "You alive, kid?" And yeah, maybe it was the fact that he now knew his mother didn't love him, or that finally all that happened today crashed on him on this moment. Or maybe it was the familiar rough voice of Chizme, but Izuku's mouth quivered, and then tears started to fall. Hot tears streaming down the sides of his face on his temples. It took a while for him to calm down, and Chizme had no idea what to do to help him. So, they had both sat down on the sofa. Chizme was sharpening his katana, talking in a low voice about his day, and Izuku was listening to him, curled up on one corner of the couch. It was, while he was still feeling horrible, rather nice. After a moment of silence, the only noise filling the room being the tool sharpener against the blade, Chizme spoke out loud. "Been a while since I've seen you in that state. What happened?" It took a moment for Izuku to remember how to talk, his mind being all fuzzy, and he wondered if maybe he had been dissociating since leaving his mom's apartment. Like Chizme said, it hasn't happened in a while. He swallowed. Then he opened his mouth. The words started flowing out. He told the man everything that happened, the USJ, the League of Villains, the Nomu, and then his mother kicking him out. Chizme hadn't interrupted him during his explanations, but his jaw had tightened as his grip did around his blade. The man wasn't the one to show his emotions easily, and it was only because Izuku knew him for 5 years that he could read him at all. That he could read him well. The man was angry. He hoped that he wasn't mad at him. Otherwise, he would probably start crying again or do something very stupid. "The League of Villains, huh?" Chizme's voice startled him out of his thoughts, and he nodded. The hero killer took a deep breath and turned to meet his eyes. Izuku stayed still, eyes wide and still a little teary, hands around his knees, keeping his legs close to his chest. "I should have told you about that before. It's important information, even more if you're in touch with what's going on the illegal side of business." Izuku frowned. Chizme usually didn't withdraw any kind of information, answering questions he knew the answer of, and most of the time, when he didn't answer, it was because it was something personal or he simply didn't know. Izuku actually knew a good chunk of what was happening between villains, their gangs, their contacts, and quirks. Information that a first year at UA definitely shouldn't know. And now, with what Chizme just said, his curiosity was piqued. "There's rumors going around in the underground, legends about villains in dark times, before, at the beginning of the appearance of quirks." Chizme sighed, clearly wondering how the hell he was going to explain all that, but he glanced at the kid, who was looking truly alive since he arrived at the barn. "Alright, time to tell a story." "We don't know much, but it's more of a rumor than anything, like I said. But, as you know too, rumors are rather taken seriously in the underground. There was a man, a villain, that used to rule, and had a strong quirk, a quirk that could take quirks." Izuku stilled at that. This was never heard of. He blinked. "Wait until I finish talking before shooting a billion questions, kid. So, this man kind of disappeared for a while, and I'm talking decades here, but people started talking about him again in the last few years, about his return, which would make him really fucking old, so he might have gained a sort of immortality quirk along the way. Anyway, that League of Villains, most definitely working for him, if that's truly him and not some idiot intimidating him, Shigaraki, right? Disintegration quirk. Powerful fucker. But he's a fucking kid. Don't underestimate them, though. I won't. He told me he would meet me again. To give back what I did to him. Chizame grimaced at that, looking honestly annoyed. Be careful, then. I will. A moment of silence. Do you know anything about Nomu? Chizame shook his head, starting to sharpen his blade again. Izuku watched him do it, waiting for something. He didn't really know what, though. You can't stay here. Oh. Izuku's heart dropped. He kept his eyes driven on his knees. He had thought that maybe... But, yeah, of course. What was Izuku thinking? Why would a villain let him stay in his hiding place? Like he wanted him here in the first place? It's not a good enough shape to live in. You'll be too cold at night, and there's no electricity. You got a place in mind already? Izuku looked up at Chizame, who frowned. Are you going to cry again? I told you I don't like crying kids. Izuku actually snorted. He'd heard this sentence so many times, less and less through the years as he learned to keep his emotions in check. He hadn't expected Chizame to worry about his living situation. In his chest, a little warmth crept in, chasing the cold away. That was chapter 6. I'm so sorry that it's been so long since I've posted. But here you go. Hope you have a good day or night or, whenever the hell you're listening to this. So, bye.